I'm moving the phone.
Hi, Jason.
I'll be back on.
Hello.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. Oh, he left. I scared him away. How are you, Jay?
He's switching to mobile phone because he
Okay.
wants to move to the kitchen and prepare some lunch. Yeah, that's the plan.
Sounds like a good plan.
So John was about to give a presentation he prepared. So let's hand it over to John.
I can launch into that, and then if Jeff would like, he can catch up on the recording. Let me acquire the screen.
Sociocracy. Sociocracy?
Yes.
Sociocracy.
Yes. Present. That's what I want. So again, sociocracy it's a cooperative framework that Jim Carver proposed pretty early on as a way for us to communicate. I'm going to try to turn on a fan real quick. Will you please let me know if this affects your ability to hear me?
Yeah, sociocracy can be too formal, and it's another name is holacracy. You hear, which is also considered by some to be too formal, and I guess holacracy is trademark, and a lot of people have turned away from that term because of the trademark. But there's a whole range of practices in sociocracy, and and I'll let you continue.
Yeah, we'll definitely get your feedback later on.
Give me some feedback.
I only had time to read through the 7 principles. I don't know how long it's going to take me to make it through all the patterns, but the 7 principles I think was a really good start. It was probably just 50 or 60 pages. So I would recommend that as worthwhile reading to any of you. And I actually recognized some of this when I started delving into it. The socio here is the same socio as in sociologist. The term sociocracy was first used by Auguste Comte. He's considered the first sociologist. Not really the first sociologist, but the first to use that term. So they get to call him the founder. And sort of the distillation of his idea was that sociologists were going to be the rulers of the world one day, or technocrats, you might say. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So these are the goals that I tried to focus on here: to briefly introduce and explore possibilities for integrating Sociocracy 3.0 and Stochasteroia, which relates to my own work with, I call it all sorts of different things. Non-linear text, mind map is probably what will make the most sense and be the most familiar to everyone. And Stochasteroia it's my attempt to describe the parameters of the mindset that has come with that, and I'll get more into that soon. So I'm looking at synthesizing these together, but more importantly, with the Team Human Discord, it will actually be more of a trajectory of sociocracy compared to the Discord. And then the Stochasteroia is sort of my way of presenting my own vibe tribes as well, values, interests, beliefs, ethics, slant. So here are some perceived pros and cons. We get an extensive integrated toolbox of helpful terminology and practical processes. And just the terminology alone could really help our communication. And that toolbox is focused on mutuality and cooperation. I'm not always convinced that it takes into account the same rigor that Team Human does about the biases of these technologies, which inevitably come into play when we try to enact these solutions. And one of the most interesting things I found in it was this emphasis on granting supremacy to the best arguments, not who's in charge, or even like say there's a minority element in the Senate that gets to stop everything through a filibuster. So it's not even consent, but the as I understand it, Jim, you'll have to correct me later, that the principle of consent as they've designed it, it's for seeking out that negative feedback. And from what little I've read of cybernetics, the negative feedback is the key to keeping a system coherent. If all it does is validate itself, then that's how you get a runaway train or a runaway system. So I find that very interesting. And along with the mutuality, they do encourage flexibility and adaptivity. We're encouraged to pick and adapt what we want. And some of the cons, and these are maybe not so much cons, just areas of tension or friction that I perceive that we need to deal with. Much of Sociocracy 3.0 may need to be reinitialized for Team Human due to mechanomorphism, for example, or solutionism biases. The solutionism is the more serious objection there. This word I used, initialize, I'm going to zoom out to try and get my little definition for that. That is a term from my time as a weather forecast tech in the Navy. To initialize or initialization means testing your available forecast models against available data. And this might result in simply choosing a model or proceeding based on a combination of inputs and awareness of their biases. So initialization is really something that I generalize with all media or technology. And when I say media or technology, I mean much more like what Mark Filippi called soma, which is this, it's a category of relationship with your environment. It's a cycle of a cybernetic organism. That's how I think about technology. It's always participatory, both objective and subjective. That's a bit of a tangent, so let me bring the presentation back. So another con here, or challenge, is some of the principles of consent, equivalence, and accountability, in particular, especially consent, I think, because that's sort of at root of the others. As presented, I believe they lack the robustness necessary for effectively sinking into the Team Human conversation. And luckily, we're encouraged to pick and adapt what we want. So that's not a deal breaker by any means, but I think this stuff needs to come first if we're going to start using these tools, because later down the road we get to distributing work with work groups or roles. And well, let me go on to the next slide and try to explain why I think that's a challenge and how we can deal with that challenge. Oh boy. Okay, here is a example of a useful concept from the sociocracy framework. Driver. A driver is a person's or a group's motive for responding to a specific situation. Now, this is also an example of the mechanomorphism I mentioned. We could just as easily come up with some replacement for this term that's a little more in tune with the team human sensibilities. I might have some suggestions for that, but I'm just gonna scoot on ahead for now and use driver occasionally. Team human is not an organization. This has been made explicit. Rushkoff said he's received offers to develop it into an organization. He's turned them all down. So we need to acknowledge that, because I'm saying the most that we can say about Team Human right now is that it's a conversation. It's about conversation either, so it gets a bit meta. But one thing with conversation is there's a legacy to it and there's memory to it. And however it plays out, the conversation under the name Team Human was initiated under that name, Team Human, by Douglas Rushkoff. And that also plays into what brings new members to the server, because that's the one thing we know, that they're vibing with the Team Human output. This is sort of how I rationalize having a show discussion in the connecting category on the server list. Also the salons, it's a major channel for how we're coming together. Now, however, it's a conversation which may support or be supported by organizations. So I would say the podcast crew itself, that's a little organization. They have a Patreon, they have operating costs, but Team Human remains the conversation, and there's this egalitarian ethos kind of coming in there. I would even venture that Team Human is a sort of art project in a sense, where the manifestation of however people self-organize around it is trying to approximate this idea of the Team Human, or humans are about being in teams. But anyway, for this group, and not just us four, but anybody interested in organizing more in the server, logically from what I've said, I think the driver for us coming together is facilitating conversation in the Team Human Discord server. Now, we may have different ideas how to do that. Maybe what's needed is to have a person to facilitate for a given channel and take that sort of approach. That's basically the same topic I alluded to before with the roles. So let's move on and see how that could maybe be done in the midst of these tensions. Now this is getting into more of my own vibes, I guess, my own driver. I'll try to keep this brief, and some of it's going to be word salad that I may just have to explain later. So informational asymmetry, I call this the driver that I'm most responding to, the situation I'm most motivated to do something about. In summary, we know that the world outside, inside, and in between us is radically complex and interconnected, but we still rely on archaic linear conventions of text to organize a vast amount of our communication in a radically more interconnected world, at least a radically more interconnected human world, I should have said. I believe this imbalance represents a key constraint, bottleneck, or scarcity inducing factor for social progress. And as you may have heard, scarcity mindsets, they can lead to some pretty zero-sum behaviors. And I'm also calling this a hidden contributor to some of the individualist cultural impedances to cooperation that Jim's posted about. And it's also very informed by Robert Anton Wilson, it should say there, in terms of the snafu principle, or Celine's law, summarized as communication is only possible between equals. So basically, I believe that as long as there's any informational asymmetry, it will cause problems that emerge. For example, in the sociocracy framework, say we instituted some sociocracy in which there's a selection of merit toward positions of influence, which is also similar to the techno-meritocracy framework that was recently introduced by another member. Now, who gets to make the determination of who has merit other than the people that were just selected for their merit? So I just have this tension that there's something, there's some hidden causes there. And I don't know all of those hidden causes, never will, but the one I'm focused on is nonlinear and linear text. On that note, my developing response to this situation can be loosely summed up as stochasteroia. I call this a design sensibility from working with said maps. They're stochasteroid mind maps, stochastic, and they're toroid. And I might call this the opposite of informational asymmetry. It's not symmetry, because that would just mean that you know the same things, which never happens. But instead, we need information synergy. And some time ago, I made an effort to describe this to myself with some word salad. So that salad is transcontextual, focal plastic, combinual iterative, collaborative design, enabling clear, open, developmental synchrony, which inspires more of the collaborative design. So there's sort of a subject and object relationship here that kind of emerged. As I said, I'm trying to just sketch the parameters of what I see and not saying this will be my set solution. I watched a Tyson Yunkaporta Rebel Wisdom interview the other night in which he made really clear his belief that once you have a grand solution and you give a name to it, you're done. You're out of the interconnected system. All you can do is foster the conditions for emergence. So all this stuff, it's descriptive. It's not some panacea. It's got an expiration date, which is when it does what it needs to do. Otherwise, I mean, you may as well have some like child's warning label on the chemicals under your sink. You know, don't drink this. It's great for cleaning your sink, but don't drink it, for God's sake. But let me pick out a few of these. Maybe too long to do all of it. See, yeah, I've taken up 26 minutes already. Transcontextual, this is basically the same thing that Nora Bateson says about warm data. Need to be able to move between boundaries between disciplines, for example. And this corresponds to what I mean by open. And I'll skip this for a second, but combinual iterative, I made up combinual. It's combination and continual. I would hope the meaning is somewhat plain in the structure of the word, but it just means being able to shift between those contexts without losing your coherence from the friction of doing so. That's combinuity. And this is what I mean by clear. So without friction, yet able to communicate between contexts and to do so smoothly. And iteration, that's the cyclic structure that helps you navigate in all of this. Now, focal plastic, this is something I came up with to describe what I was finding. It's just, I would actually summarize it as human-centered in this context, because it means the adaptability and adaptation of information to your perspective. It's showing you what you need to see when you need to see it. This corresponds to the principle of equivalence, say, when a decision will be made that may affect you, you need to be told. So that's a whole conversation to have, but as an introduction, it will suffice. And developmental synchrony. So the iteration has to be a developmental iteration. It needs to be, what's that word? Salutatory means something that's good for you, even though it feels bad. Jordan Peterson loves this word, but I'm interested in salutatory technology, which, as I said, that it's not just the thing. It's the behavior with the thing. You initialize for the thing, ideally, and then you even test to see if it did what you needed it to do. And synchrony. This is informed by my study of Lisa Feldman Barrett, revolutionary neuroscientist. You could compare it to synchronous communication, because when you get synchronous communication, you're more likely to get synchronous conceptualization, which is it's predicting with the compatible toolkits of the same ideas, knowing what each other are talking about, being in another's presence, and in training the breath and the eyes. So wrapping up here, sociocracy could benefit the team human discord facilitation which you may or may not agree describes accurately the driver of our meeting here, but requires granular, rigorous reinitializing, combining it with the new data from the context we want to bring in or bring it into, which is Team Human. There's that whole sensibility and conversational legacy. We're skeptical of the canned solutions and individualistic solutionism of our culture that's got us to this wonderful place in history. So I'm very hazy on my own role with the server right now. There's some kind of sense in which I'm Josh's proxy. He messaged me after I offered to step down and said that I was still his pick for the process, or for the moment, I should say. But in fact, I'm interested in diminishing my own involvement in a set of role agreements once we're ready for them. And I strongly believe that making the principles of consent, equivalence, robust in the Team Human context is necessary before we're ready to do that. There's a logic there, and I'd like to see that made communal, which is again really my area of interest, and it's where I see myself wanting to move more in the future. And I've really already been doing it with the posts I've made of the discussion roundup and the moon cycle. Though that's all same part. That's all part of the same informational work. So this is just it's not a polished presentation. It's just what's been on my mind. I was able to get across.
Hey, thanks. I mean, it must have felt good to contain it, your experience so far of the server in this form of a presentation.
There is a good feeling to it.
I think so.
Baskets.
Before I give some feedback, maybe first I'll ask you or the master himself if
I should specify I do have to leave at 4:00 sharp.
Sure, but I'll ask Jim maybe to provide some first feedback based on the presentation.
Trying to stop sharing my screen as well. Stop share. Okay, sorry, listening.
Well, I guess I can echo some of the basic ideas. I guess when you're talking about consent, immediately I think back to an interface I developed back in the early '80s, which showed people the differences between their views and the group views, and asked them to compromise if they wanted to compromise or stand up for their position. And when we ran the experiment with students at NJIT, everyone said okay to compromise, and they really reached a consensus in a matter of a minute or two. So the consensus was high, but the quality, the collective intelligence was low. Okay, so developing consent doesn't always mean you've gotten a good solution. And
Sociocracy.
So in sociocracy, the method that's used is first you if there's an issue that comes up, okay, the facilitator, or whether it's a single person or whether it's a group of people that work together in facilitating the group, whatever, is to elicit questions. Try to get everyone to say what their questions are about the issue. And then concerns. Okay, after all the questions have come out and you did them, you try to get the concerns that people have. And then questions, concerns. And basically,
Well, if I could cut in, I
Sure.
really like that, Jim, because that turns the tables of, say, a survey-based engagement from us interrogating us as, I don't know, representing some team human supporting organization and sending this message to them interrogating us. Yeah, I really like that idea of eliciting questions.
And then the other aspect of consent is, I guess the objection, and I think that's been covered in the discussion here. Is it in line with our goals and objectives? If it's not in line, that's then we have a valid objection. And if it's not safe enough to try, we have a valid objection. And so so then we would answer the objectives. And if the objections are answered, then there's consent, so to speak. So that's fairly specific in terms of what that means. You've handled the questions, the concerns, the objections, and so you have a decision. But the other thing we learned in Dig Life is that being too formal, and we had a formal sociocracy leader, so to speak, it can slow down processes. So sometimes it's better, if the group has, is basically familiar with the principles and the concepts of it, it can go much faster. For example, a sociocratic election becomes something where, you try to, get some input from people on who they propose, and then and why, and generally very quickly, you either find someone to, nobody can tell anyone what to do. So, it has to be voluntary, governance by consent and all that. What was the other thing?
Yeah, maybe we can get some comebacks from a few other people also. I don't know, Jason or Joe, did you have anything to add to the presentation, or questions perhaps?
No, I don't. I share a lot of John's frustration with linear conversation and ways of communicating things. I've fortunately worked with John a little bit and seen some of his other presentations on the kind of mind mapping involved with when we did our Robert Anton Wilson book club. And so I'm familiar kind of with the idea. I'm not sure how effectively it could be deployed like within the Discord, but I like the idea of kind of having it as something that's kind of in your head and recognizing and trying to find adaptations to how to improve this server. Again, like as I've discussed a few times, like I think Discord is not optimal for a number of things. But I think what we've done now, and kind of organizing things and adding video channels and opportunities for people to communicate and find the others and just get in touch and relate is super helpful. I think that really relates a lot to the core of what Team Human is about. That's what I'm most excited about. And I think it's tough to, always going to be tough to do that in writing. So that's kind of one thing that I'm kind of looking to do as I get more time and more engaged in the servers, try and facilitate more just like group-led conversations and interactions rather than like, okay, there's a salon coming up because we have someone who's coming to give a presentation and making that the only impetus for people to kind of be in the same place at the same time talking.
Yeah. Oh, this reminds me, I recently learned something I think you all will find interesting, but I noticed a role in the server list called Apollo. So I looked at it, and it is an integration with a Discord scheduling bot. This was looked at by Josh and the rest of the podcast team, I guess, as a potential, support for the salons. But I saw that, and immediately I was like, the facilitation interested people would probably be interested in this. I asked Josh about it, and he said they installed it, but they just never used it. So just putting that out there, we probably have access to Apollo scheduling bot.
It's good to know. Yeah, I need to look into kind of Discord bots in general and see if there's other ones that could be used to leverage kind of some of these things we're looking at doing.
Yeah, Shadimus may be interested in helping with that sort of thing soon also.
Yeah, so from my side, I really think you spotted the right driver, being the facilitation of conversation more than the building of an organization. I think that's right. I spontaneously started doing that when I joined the server. Just kind of adding some text, and then there was some engagement there, but that needs to be kind of an ongoing thing, I suppose, like these people that take on these facilitating roles to spark or conversation in that way. That's one thing. The other thing is the sociocracy thing. I have to say, I've been using it in my conversation also at work. I've become slightly disillusioned by the idea that we are working in a kind of hierarchical structure, even when it's just 20 people over at in our office, and I'm like, I almost can't take it anymore. So then I started, talking with some colleagues about sociocracy, just based on the illustration, right? The illustration you shared, Jim, with the tables from the top. And I just started fantasizing with some colleagues. Maybe we can do this. Like maybe if we have the chief or a cleaning lady and 2 colleagues at a table of 4 to discuss matters that have to do with the whole organization, and we meet on a quarterly basis, and we try to reach consent. Let's try to do that. So it's for me, it was a useful conversation starter, and we're not there yet. But I was also amazed by yeah, the model of it, and I wonder if it will work. Yeah.
Yeah, I also I've been reading a little bit about it came up in a different conversation I was having recently about libertarian Marxism, and it kind of led me down this down this thread to learn about participism, which I think is very similar to the idea of this sort of model of having groups, and then the groups go to larger groups and kind of work their way up towards consensus at the end. So yeah, it's definitely, I agree. I'm in the same boat as Sven with having increasing level of relevance in my life.
Great. Joe, do you have anything to add, or maybe we can skip to another topic as well? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know what I have to add. I think I'm just aligned in this idea of facilitating, people in the Discord to get together more and talk more and share how they're showing up on Team Human in their lives. So I would just add, I guess I do have something to add, that yeah, like my focus is on all of us, including me. Like I'm just as guilty as anybody else. Just that level of support for getting people more present and active in their own personal lives, at their own workplace, in their families, in their communities. There's only so much we can do as an online group versus what people can do in person, in real communities, when there's a real material impact, right? So I don't know.
Yeah,
I hope that's helpful and useful.
Yeah, this is something for sure that I was thinking about specifically after the Tyson Yunkaporta Salon, where he talks about, and it's in the book quite a bit as well, Santok, about being engaged with your local community and your local environment, and kind of letting all of those things influence you allows you to really establish systems thinking in your way of being, so you can recognize those patterns. And so I didn't get a chance to ask his opinion on it in the Salon, but I'm curious how online communities like this one can kind of be supportive of that effort, and not kind of just be taking away capacity from some of those efforts. I think that being able to share ideas and share what's going on with each other can possibly generate more, inspire more of that kind of activity in our local situations. And again, I've certainly learned from Joe and from other people on the Discord server that like having someone you can just talk to about whatever happens to be on your mind is always nice. And so that's one nice thing about the server, is that it's easy to get into it. It's usually somebody around.
Right. Yeah, there's a few topics I wrote down. The new structure of the channels and the categories. I wonder if we're satisfied with it as it is now, or what do you guys think? Maybe John?
Yeah, I don't think I'm ever going to be satisfied with it. If I was treating it as my own information management challenge, I don't want to say constantly, but say periodically rearrange it based on usage, but that also that's affected by frequency, by how long a time frame you've been considering. Like if I just rearranged it based on the usage over the past week or two, I would have moved organizing with the governance channel to the bottom. But the fact is, in the past month or two, there's been a massive amount of participation and just involvement from that group. Yeah, I don't have specific thoughts on it right now. That's the sort of thing that comes with the power to do it, I guess. That well, like I said, I'm interested in cutting back on my involvement with that. So anybody that has ideas or would like to volunteer involvement in specifying or dealing with the just the routine stuff of the server, let me know. The only thing I would say is I mentioned the conversational legacy that I think needs to be respected, and there's a certain frequency to that, and I think we disconnect from that legacy if we draw conclusions that are not informed by the longer frequencies of participation. I think Jason and probably Joe too have been active on the server long enough to understand some of what I'm talking about, but it's also something I'm just hazy about in general, which is why I mentioned the specification thing. Any ideas that y'all have?
I really like the new organization system. I like that those categories are I think they're were well developed to kind of really give people an idea of what they can be accomplished in that general area. I think it's helpful for generating new channels as well. While I do hear what you're saying in terms of like moving things that are the most frequently used or most active to the top, that's way more work than I would ever ask anyone to do.
Yeah.
The other thing is too, I mean, Discord has a lot of things that like they're not very obvious necessarily or intuitive, but like if you minimize the group, it will hide anything that hasn't been active recently. So that's a way of kind of keeping keeping things a little bit less crowded.
I hadn't even thought of that since I've been surfing the new channels or categories.
Yeah, I'll forget to re-expand things, so it's kind of one of those quirky little things.
This is another good point also, like you could see how much I benefited from consulting with other perspectives during that like the Finding the Others cafe. While we're all here, I may as well mention that not only would I like to move that beneath the Team Human Salon in that category, but I think we're about ready to start a new category for Rushkoff's books, which I think would just be 2 channels right now, but I think that's enough. And I mean, these are just minor things, but because I have so much ambiguity about it, it's kind of this like cognitive emotional load that I don't really think is beneficial for me to keep on going on my own, which I'm not. I'm trying to engage with a lot of you, but yeah, just regular conversation like this. It's been a month since the last one here, but it helps. That just plays right back into the synchronization theme.
Yeah, I would say if it's causing you anxiety, don't hesitate to take a step back from any of the active steps that you're doing. I think the server is going to maintain itself in most aspects. And, you know, I think that maybe what would be good is if, I mean, I guess, I think it's worked. It seems to me like it's worked fairly well if you just tag someone in a thought that you have, and then we can kind of discuss it and give you a little bit of feedback on it. So you don't feel like there's a burden in you working, you know, unilaterally.
I mean, speaking of the tagging, sorry to cut you off. I've got to leave soon. But Sociocracy has this point that about rotating roles. So you have a term with your role, and I don't really have an official role, but that would be pretty much the most powerful way to switch things up. Like what you said is right. Like if I get anxiety, then what I shouldn't be bringing that kind of affect or comportment to the role. But the other option is like, I don't know, because I don't even know what the role is. That's the ambiguity. Like, do I just untag myself and let the server go from there?
I think so. Do you think it would be helpful to put together a document or a channel, or however we want to do it, that we can kind of just put in our own, what, you know, the things that we do and what we feel like our roles are within the server specifically? And then, I mean, we could always maybe contribute ways that maybe our skill sets are. So in case anybody has an idea what we might be able to do. And my main reason for saying that is because I have a hesitance as well to take on a role, because if there's not a term limit on it of some kind, I think if we have a document that outlines everything that you do, it'll be easier to say, you know, we're looking for someone else who can do this within the server for a while. Instead of saying, I do these 17 things, I need someone to do all these 17 things.
Yeah. Well, we're at the first quarter part of the lunar phase, which is exactly what I would expect if I was looking for a project to wrap up for the phase. So yeah, Jason, I think the document is a great idea to start brainstorming. I don't expect it to be simple or play by numbers for all the reasons I discussed in the presentation. But
yeah, I can put together a really basic document that just kind of, you know, has people on there, and we can put the things that we actively do, and that'll at least give us a starting point for potentially reallocating some things. And then we can, I think it'll be a little bit easier to invite people into actively participating in the governance process if they can see, well, this is, you know, what's going on, and I'm not committing to meetings all the time or actively spending all this time managing things, but it's just, you know, one or two things maybe I do, and I just do it for a couple months and then I come back to it later.
Yeah, and especially with the term limits, that's part of iteration as well. Like a common theme we kept talking about with sociocracy, or even what I call stochasteroia, is, you know, some of it might work, but some of it might not work. So you have to adapt it. But iteration is kind of built into both things. And if you have a collective process of that, like the term is until the group meets again of facilitative interested teammates, then you can start getting that rhythmic motion toward a goal. And it's,
yeah,
I don't even know how to describe the limits of what you can accomplish with that kind of thing.
Yeah, I like the idea of being able to have a set term limit, so you know you're not committing for over this amount of time, but then also potentially being able to continue on longer if it's something you're comfortable with, if you have the capacity for it. But I'll kind of see if I can put that into better writing. I know you got to go, John. So
That's awesome. Great talk, everybody. Thanks for listening. I'll catch up with the rest as soon as I can.
Sure.
Yeah,
Thanks, John.
and you can have a sociocratic election anytime to assign anybody new to any position. You just call for it.
Keep that in mind. Peace out, everybody. Enjoy your day.
All right.
You too. Bye.
hey, John.
All right.